This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, NoNonsenseForex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 237 is brought to us by Bybit. A lot of your New Year's resolutions was to trade more and invest more and be more active in this market, especially because you all know what you're doing, especially compared to most people. Put it into play, and you may as well do it on the platform that can really let you trade anything you want. You can get great yield on your dollars in the meantime. Get a robust spot market you can buy from, an amazing card you can use anytime you want. It's all right there, and you get extra bonuses by clicking my affiliate link, which you will find in the Bybit blog. The link for that blog is down below in the show notes, and the affiliate link is at the bottom of the blog. If you're just getting started, or you're looking for a broker that actually does things for you as a secondary broker or as a future primary broker, Bybit's the only way to go here, because with Bybit membership has its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and oh baby, it's time for the big macro episode of 2026, and things in the macro and geopolitical world are starting off with a bang, excuse my terminology. But for those of you who are new or have not listened to the big macro episode before, what it is what I do is every year, the very first episode of the year, I talk all things macro in terms of how it's going to set up, in my opinion, for the year ahead, and then make predictions on whether I think the price of the S&P 500 and the United States dollar, according to the DXY, is going to be higher at the end of the year or lower than it was at the very beginning of this year. And then throughout the month of January, we will have episodes talking about the other aspects of what we like to invest in. And you will see equal predictions regarding gold, silver, Bitcoin, and all things energy. With the full understanding that in order to do what we do here, you must have a 5 to 10 year time horizon for everything you invest in. But I still think it's good to set up the year the best we can, so we can have a little bit of expectation, so we can be ready for what might happen. Now, when it comes to 2026, I think a lot of what we saw in 2025 is going to carry over, not in terms of results so much, but in terms of who is steering the macro ship. And I do get accused of being a bit too American-centric on this show, but you know as well as I do that Donald Trump and the United States is steering the macro ship. The things that he does and the United States does just matters more in the big scope of things. I mean, other countries are doing meaningful things. They just don't matter when it comes to the market. Maybe they do initially. Russia invaded Ukraine and started a large war, and the market reacted then. But then a few months later, it came right back to where it was. It's just all things go through the United States right now. And for an investor, that's actually a good thing. You don't want 5 or 6 regions of the world to sit there and have to worry about. And what we saw in 2025 is that, at least from a geopolitical and economic standpoint, Donald Trump generally gets what he wants. So that's even better for us in investment land, because that's something we can use. While so many people are freaking out over every little thing he does, not understanding that a lot of things he does is part of a greater play for something else, they end up like cats chasing laser pointers. And if you're trying to be one of those people and you're trying to invest, you're going to have a really, really rough time. The correct thing to do is to try to figure out the largest play on the board. If you can figure that out, or if you can at least get a good prediction or a good idea of what that thing might be, then everything else on a smaller scale becomes a lot easier, because it just makes a lot more sense. So for example, it is January 3rd, 2026 as I record this, and last night the United States just invaded, I guess, Venezuela, you could say, and then this morning I see that they kidnapped Maduro and his wife. And this is not surprising at all, actually. Maybe the kidnapping part was a little surprising. But you remember, I've said this on the show before. I said the United States is almost certainly going to move in on Venezuela. Now, you have to understand, there's the reason they tell you about,
and then there's the larger play. And I've stated the larger play on this show. So let's go ahead and start with that. And I'm not the only person who thinks this, but I've been saying this for a long time. I think, and some of you are going to disagree, and that's fine. But I believe that the United States realizes that China is going to be a rival for the next 50 years, probably. And what Trump at least is looking to do is lock down the entire Western Hemisphere and bring them in to the American sphere of influence, thus kicking China out. China has done a great job infiltrating certain parts of the world that are far away from China. The main reason they do it is for resources. But as we all know, resources have all of a sudden become a thing because China and the United States both understand this now. For a long time, it was just China that understood it. The U.S. was asleep. But I think the U.S. thinks if they can just lock down the Western Hemisphere and still have trading partners in the East that they get along with, this will not only be enough to have all the resources that everybody needs to be sustainable, but you also get two continents that are very easy to defend all the same. But in order to do this, everybody needs to be generally pulling in the same direction. We knew Nicolas Maduro was never, ever going to do that. We also knew that the Venezuelan people just didn't have enough in them to get rid of him themselves. And I'm going to tell you right now, I know a lot of Venezuelans. All of my friends in Panama when I lived there were Venezuelan. I know a lot from the Nomad and expat forums. I'm going to bet you they're all very much in favor of what just happened. But human interest stories aside, because that is not what we focus on here. The United States pretty much already has North America locked down for the most part, not all the way, but close enough. South America is going to be more difficult, but you have to get the what they consider to be the bad actors out. Maduro was obviously the biggest one. Yes, there is oil there. That is the main reason his detractors will say that's why he was there. The Trump administration will say that the drug trade and getting rid of that was the biggest reason of why we are there now. And that is true. Both are true, actually. But you have to understand, too, it's a secondary reason. Just like one of the first things he did when he got into office was to try and to crack down on the fentanyl trade. Why? Because a lot of stuff comes from China, and they make a ton of money at the expense of the United States. It's the opposite of what we did to them during the Opium Wars. So yes, cracking down on the drug trade that has been allowed to just get out of control in the United States is a good thing, but it's just not the number one thing, in my opinion. Just like what's going on with the immigration going on and the remigration going on in the United States too. Is there fraud there? Yes. Does the American taxpayer have to foot the bill? Yes. But what's the bigger play? Contrarians, you should know this. Agree or disagree, it is the idea that the opposition has been importing voters for a very long time. I am going to get political here, deal with it, but your average American does not want to vote for liberal policies or a liberal party. The liberals know this, so they will do whatever they can to tilt the scales in their favor, even if it is not in the best interest of the American citizens themselves. Other countries, check amongst yourselves. It's the same playbook. So when you hear about, the crime that the ICE agents are getting rid of, when you hear about the fraud that's going on in places like Minnesota, yes, those are reasons to do what they're doing, but it's just not the primary reason. And what's going on right now, domestically at least, does tie in to the theme of this episode. Trump's biggest concern for 2026 is losing the House of Representatives in the midterms. It could easily flip blue. Historically, this is what normally happens. It's very, very hard for any president to maintain the power they have after the midterms. And on top of that, we see sentiment already shifting in places like New York City, where they just voted for a socialist mayor, and Miami, which for 28 years had been a Republican stronghold for the most part. They just voted a Democratic mayor themselves. who was not a socialist, by the way. There was an actual socialist who ran. She didn't win. But the mayor is already talking about things like collectivism, and it's like, oh boy. But she ran under the same platform as the mayor of New York City ran and said, hey, look, things are unaffordable right now. I will make them more affordable. And that's literally all you have to do these days to win an election, because times are difficult for people. We spoke before on an episode on this show just how crazy inflation has actually been. Not the numbers they show you, but how bad it's actually been since 2020. Back in 2019, did you see any social media with anybody talking about how unaffordable anything was in the United States? No, you almost never saw that. To where now you see it all the time. And the stock market has done nothing but get stronger and stronger over that time. So what's changed? Duh, it's our fiat currency. And I would like to believe that the things that the Trump administration is doing is attempting to set the United States up for greater prosperity down the road, but you're not going to see any of this stuff right away. At least not most of it. So that's a very difficult thing to contend with because of all the damage that has been done leading up to now, especially with fiat currencies. You have I don't want to say spoiled, but a lot of people in the West have lived very well for a very long time. And as soon as that changes, even a little bit, look what happened back in 2020. People really start to get concerned, and they will start to care more about things like politics. So in order to keep everything in his favor, what does Donald Trump and the Trump administration need to do for 2026? Well, we've talked about this on the show too. I think a lot of people are this way, but I will speak for my own people when I say that Americans in general are fairly kind of slow and stupid when it comes to voting. All you really have, we talked about this before, if you just keep gas prices down, they will generally vote for you. Like, that's literally all it takes. So I'm sure the administration is aware of this. So I would expect an attempt to keep gas prices down. And I would also see a very strong attempt to keep the economy very strong, because Donald Trump has more or less tied his entire success and his image to the overall prosperity of the United States economy. So I would expect a very strong push to try to make sure that the S&P 500 does not drop during this time, which would be something that his opposition would be able to hammer him on coming into the midterms. So I'll just go ahead and put while I'm talking about it, might as well put my predictions out now. I will repeat them again at the end of the show for my own sake when I come back and listen to these, so I can do my report card episode as the final episode of 2026. But for these reasons, and it's funny too, because elections are in November. So that's going to be a whole other 2 months for things to go sideways if they do. But I will say, because I can at least speak for the first 10 months of 2026, that my prediction for the whole year is going to be S&P 500 higher. And you pretty much already know what I'm going to say about oil, but that is its own episode. So let me go ahead and get the S&P prediction out now. I'm going to say S&P will be at a higher price on the last day of 2026 than it was the very first day of 2026. And that is my main reason. And it's just one of those things, I don't see any other reason to make a prediction here. Like, sure, there's arguments on both sides to where the economy could go up or down, but there is every year, right? So if I'm playing the odds, I would say higher because it's normally higher, but there is added incentive to do so this year in particular. I'm very aware of all the reasons why it could go down. We had a recession episode this year, I think at least one, maybe two, back in 2025. I know AI was a big reason for the success of 2025, and that bubble's about to burst or about to close. Okay. Do we not know that bubbles can last a very, very long time here? I'm done trying to time these things. If anything, I heard somebody say this past week, as soon as you hear something's in a bubble, that is the best time to invest because bubbles last a while. So if I'm wrong there, I'm wrong there. That's fine. And I could be very right leading up to the election. And then the election ends, and then everything just completely falls apart. Who knows, dude? The main thing I want to get across to all of you is just to understand the larger picture at play. Don't end up like these cats chasing laser pointers, like, oh my God, he did this. Oh my God, he did that. Whether you love what he's doing or hate what he's doing does not matter in the scope of investing. And this is an investing podcast. And worrying about these small events that lead up to the bigger picture is very mushy middle behavior. And that is not where we lie. We are long-term investors. We look at the big picture, because that's the only thing that makes sense in our world. And that is one of our largest advantages. I would argue it's our biggest advantage, is that we can see all these things happening in the world because the 2020s have been nothing but chaotic. As investors, not as humans, but as investors, we can generally ignore 99% of it and just focus on where the puck is going. There are so many hysterics on both sides of the political aisle. And I hope they don't invest, because what a nightmare that would be. I've done a whole episode dedicated to this too. If you are somebody who finds yourself caring a little too much about these things, I did an episode called Chill the F Out. So anybody who wants to go to YouTube, this podcast does go to YouTube, by the way, and put in a comment arguing with me about my stance or my outlook on the state of things, you might want to go listen to that episode first. We welcome debate in the comment section as long as it's friendly. But as far as being an investor goes, if things like that are your number one concern, I can say with confidence that you are doing it incorrectly. You think Warren Buffett ever freaked out over stuff like this? You think Stan Druckenmiller did? You think Peter Lynch did? No. Rich people don't care. And that's why they win. End of story. If there's one takeaway from this entire episode, contrarians, I hope that's it. But let's also move on, because not only do I make predictions on the S&P 500, which I actually got wrong last year, I also make a prediction for the United States dollar, which I got right last year. And the main reasoning why is because Donald Trump himself said he wants a lower dollar. It's good for trade, and that's exactly what he got in a big way. In a big way. We dropped from 108 down to 97, I think, on the DXY to where it sits right now. Let's take a look. No, 98 and a half, right about. And again, what were the big narratives behind this? What were the big stories they wanted you to pay attention to? Well, de-dollarization was a big one. But again, I think the bigger play is that just Trump wanted a lower dollar. And we know that when it comes to things on the geopolitical and economic scale, Trump generally gets what he wants. So that prediction was easy. This prediction, I think, is going to be a lot more difficult because the drop has kind of already happened. So that begs the question, is the dollar where he wants it right now? Or is there a chance that he wants to make it go even lower to help allow the price of the S&P 500 to go even higher? So that's one question we have to contend with here. But the other one is de-dollarization, and this is a real thing. I saw a nice tweet from Barchart showing that the U.S. dollar share of global foreign currency reserves has fallen to the lowest level of this entire century. It was at 60%, and it is now at 40%. And if you look at what's gone on since 2020, it has gone down sharply. Now, here's the thing, though. That's not the only factor when it comes to the overall price of the United States dollar against other currencies. This is where a lot of people who don't really understand Forex too well or geopolitics make a big mistake. I mean, it does factor in, sure. But there's a couple things I don't think they're considering. One is how many people really understand the euro-dollar market? And when I say euro-dollar, I don't mean the euro. I mean any dollars that are floating around outside of the United States themselves. There are more euro dollars than there are actual dollars in the United States. It's that big. And there's still so much debt out there denominated in United States dollars, and that debt has not gone away. If anything, it has increased. And things like this will continue to backdrop the strength overall of the United States dollar. In addition to that, we have had a huge surge in stablecoin usage around the world. Stablecoins are tied to United States treasuries. This is very strong for the dollar when other people are allowed to use these now. And it's been great. You've seen countries with, awful currencies because they have awful governments who make awful decisions, which you can get away with sometimes if your country is already strong, but you can get away with a lot less when your country isn't, and the people suffer. But now, people all over the world, no matter where you are, can access the United States dollar via stablecoins. And this includes governments if they want to do it. And this is something that just has not been around for a very long time. Or at least, stablecoins have been around, but they haven't been widely available like they have been now, like we really, really saw in 2025. We all know here at the 10-Minute Contrarian podcast that blockchain is the future of many things, especially when it comes to finance and payments. And the United States dollar, as far as fiat currencies go, it has such an insurmountable lead at this point. I mean, what even is the second strongest fiat currency on the blockchain, and how far behind are they? I mean, what is it, the euro? And how many people and how many countries are lining up to buy the euro? So these are all things to contend with. And I just got done mentioning YouTube. Please, everybody on audio, if you have an opinion and you want to state your predictions for 2026, please feel free. This is not just my podcast, it is our podcast. And I want to see what you guys have to say. Just do me a favor and put a little bit of reasoning behind it. Sometimes people just hit and run and say, this up, this down. Well, tell us why. Spend 10, 15 seconds and just give a little blurb as to why you feel this way. But for my predictions, I am saying S&P 500 higher. And I'm going to go a bit contrarian here, and I will also say United States dollar higher. I feel like maybe we have dropped far enough. In a way, I'm kind of doing what I did last year and hedging my S&P bet by saying the dollar might go higher as well, because in 2025 I said down, down, and in 2026 I'm going to go ahead and say up, up. Up for the S&P 500, up for the United States dollar as well. I don't have a great reasoning behind my US dollar prediction, at least not as much as I do my S&P prediction, but I have to put one out there, and so there it is. If anything, you have to look at what the dollar is measured against. And on the DXY, at least, the reason why I don't love the DXY is because over half of it is what the dollar does against the euro. Now, it's still one of life's great mysteries why the euro remains as strong as it is, because the European Union just continues to disintegrate and self-sabotage itself into irrelevancy. And to me, things appear to be falling apart even faster than they were in the past. So I will add that component to my prediction as well. But again, please go to the comments section and tell us what you think. If you're getting all pissy pants about politics, either way, whether you're very anti-Trump or super MAGA, I'm going to know. It's going to come through in your post. And you are probably not looking at this the right way. You're probably not looking at this the same way rich investors do. Now, like I said, it's okay to have an opinion on these things. It's okay to feel strongly about these things, especially if it's something that affects you and your family directly. But in the world of investing, and this is an investing podcast, it doesn't matter. The market does not care how you feel about things. We must stay laser focused on the big picture, contrarians, because the first half of this decade, as we predicted back in 2019, has been very chaotic compared to decades before it. I have no reason to believe that the back half is going to be any less chaotic. You have deglobalization, you have population decline, you have the race for critical minerals, you have once powerful nations becoming very desperate, and desperate countries do desperate things. And you have an administration in the United States who is wielding their power in ways we are just not used to seeing. The world is changing. And the only way to set ourselves up to not only prosper, but just merely survive it, is to zoom out and try to understand the larger picture the best we can. But on top of that, contrarians, you need to be active and execute and make moves. The riskiest thing in a climate like this is to not take risks and do nothing at all. because that's what most people are going to do. And they're going to be negatively affected by all of this. They already are. Spectators just get the worst of it all the time. So if you have a New Year's resolution for 2026, my advice would be to be less of a spectator and more of an active player, and not be afraid to take risks, because if you listen to this podcast, you have advantages on your side that you should be utilizing. We had a very good 2024 because of crypto. We had a very good 2025 because of metals. I even took a little video of my Charles Schwab account for 2025, and I'm going to put that up on the Substack blog, which you can subscribe to down below in the show notes at any time. But what it illustrates is, that a lot of us are not rich already. We're going to need outsized gains to really catch up and really build a portfolio that's going to last throughout all of this chaos and beyond. And I want to show you that it can be done. But there's an approach you must take, and then above anything else, you actually have to execute on that approach. It's the only way. I know there's a lot of you out there who get it, but you just don't do anything about it. All of that changes this year. Do not be a spectator. Spectators don't take risks because to them it's crazy. But we know better, especially by now, that the things we do are not crazy. We're just early.